My name is Kaylee and I wanted to create an updated version of my video about Homo Floresiensis. And I also want to take a look into the belief that they are still alive today. But first, some people get really mad at me for calling the different species in the Homo genus human, because they clearly don't realize that the word Homo is actually the Latin word for human, which means that all species in the Homo genus were human species, and that we, Homo sapiens, modern humans, really aren't that special. We are just the latest in a long line of evolution. However, one of the most enigmatic extinct human species, in my personal opinion, is Homo Floresiensis, the Hobbit species. Apparently, there are some people that are of the belief that Homo Floresiensis never went extinct. Back in April of 2022, articles were being written about the possibility that Homo Floresiensis might have been hiding in plain sight in Indonesia. And at the start of this year, yet another article came out about this idea, and I figured, since I never covered this in my fact or fiction playlist on the channel, why not do it now? So therefore,
it is time,
as they said in The Lion King. So how preposterous is the idea that Homo Floresiensis is still alive? Or is there actually some truth to it? Let's figure that out together in this video. But before we do that, I would like to mention that I'm going to return to Turkey in September of this year, and you can join me. We're going to Mount Nemrut, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Sefer Tepe, Sayburç. We're going to see Hattusha, Haran, Sokmatar, Shuaib. We're going to see the ancient city of Hattusha and the green stone that I did do that short on the channel. So if you want to join me, click on the link in the description down below that says Turkey Tour. And yeah, maybe I'll see you in Turkey. Before we take a look into the possible existence of Homo Floresiensis in modern times, we first need to take a look at who the species of Homo Floresiensis is, where they lived, their physical appearance, and everything we know about the species so far. So in a way, this is actually a new deep dive into the Hobbit species, my favorite extinct humans. So back in September of 2003, a team of archaeologists were looking for evidence of the original migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. During their research, they were on the Indonesian island of Flores, and it was on this island in the Langbua cave where they discovered a nearly complete skeleton of a really quite small person. The skeleton became known under the name Liang Bua 1, or better yet, LB1. For a while it was believed that the remains of this Homo Floresiensis individual was simply a Homo sapiens with a birth defect, until of course, as you can imagine, more bones from different individuals were found, and it was shown that it was indeed a new species. In the following year, during the subsequent excavations, the archaeologists discovered 7 additional skeletons in the Liangbua cave. So here's a fun fact for you. Normally when archaeologists discover bones this old, they are fossilized. But apparently this was not the case with the bones found here in the Liangbua cave. In fact, and this is gonna sound really nasty, the bones had a consistency that was more like blotting paper. So once they had exposed the bones from the soil in which they were found, they had to leave them to let them dry before they were able to dig them up and move them. Truly, that is one of the craziest things I've ever heard when it comes to the discovery of bones of ancient human species. And really, the idea that a bone is as soft as blotting paper, it's nasty. It's so, ugh, ew. Unfortunately, there has been some controversy surrounding this ancient extinct human species. Fossils that are found in the country of Indonesia are, officially speaking, property of the Indonesian state. In December of 2004, after the species of Homo Floresiensis had been announced to the public, Indonesian paleoanthropologist Teuku Jakob, who had formerly been the chief paleontologist of the Indonesian Gadjah Mada University, took most of the Homo floresiensis remains from the repository at Jakarta's National Research Center of Archaeology. So he took these remains with the permission of one of the institute's directors, and Jacob ended up keeping these fossils for 3 months. So during this time, he focused most of his attention to the nearly complete skeleton known as LB1. And he wasn't of the belief that the discovered fossils represented a different species. He was convinced that they were a Homo sapiens fossil, most likely a pygmy, and that the skull was smaller due to microcephaly, which is a medical condition that results in a smaller than normal brain and skull. Several anthropologists and archaeologists at this point in time, upon learning that Jacob had taken these fossils, expressed serious concerns and their fear that these specimens were taken and may have become damaged by his research. And unfortunately, when Jacob returned the remains in February of 2005, indeed several specimens were severely damaged and 2 leg bones were completely missing. So what kind of damage had been done to these bones? A jaw fragment had long and deep cuts marking the lower edge of the jaw on both sides, which is proposed to have occurred when Jacob used a knife to cut away the rubber mold he was trying to make to create casts. The chin of a second Homo floresiensis individual's jaw was snapped off, and this jaw fragment was glued back together. But whoever glued it back actually misaligned the pieces and glued it back at an incorrect angle. A pelvis was smashed, and thus details revealing body shape, gait, and evolutionary history were completely destroyed. Jacob himself denied any wrongdoing. According to him, the damages occurred during the transport from Yogyakarta back to Jakarta, despite the clear claimed physical evidence that the jawbone was broken during the creation of the mold. And at the same time, he himself was still responsible for these remains because he was the one who decided to move them from the safe location where they were back to wherever he took them, and then had them transported them back. I mean, come on. If he never took them, they wouldn't have gotten damaged. Whether you did the damage yourself or it was damaged during the transport doesn't matter, he was still responsible. And it's because of him that these remains are damaged. After this, in 2005, the Indonesian government and officials forbade all access to the Liangbua cave. The BBC during that time reported that they were of the opinion that this restriction was to protect Jacob, who at the time was considered Indonesia's king of paleoanthropology, from being proven wrong. Shortly after Jacob passed away in 2007, scientists and archaeologists were once again allowed to return to the cave, and they've been carrying out excavations and more subsequent research since. So ever since the first Homo floresiensis individual was discovered, the archaeologists have uncovered the partial skeletons of a total of 15 individuals. In the cave, the archaeologists found a number of stone tools that were quite small and would fit perfectly to be used by the small human hands. So how small were these, little Homo floresiensis humans? How small were these hobbits? The tallest skeleton that they have found so far stood at 1.1 meters, which is 3 feet and 7 inches. And they would have weighed approximately 30 kilograms, which equates to 66 pounds on average. So if we look at the description of the height of a hobbit given by the late great Tolkien, Homo floresiensis falls exactly within those measurements. Okay, but back to being serious, because I'm not sure about you, but I'm extremely intrigued by these ancient archaic humans who lived at the same time as the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo longi, Homo sapiens, us modern humans, and possibly even the new announced species of Homo juluensis. For a while, researchers felt inclined to put Homo floresiensis in its own genus known as Sudanthropus floresianus, which translates to Sonda human from Flores, but it was ultimately decided to place Floresiensis in the Homo genus. Especially because Homo floresiensis has several dental similarities to Homo erectus, which could possibly point to Homo erectus being the ancestor species that Floresiensis has in common with both modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. The ancestors of Floresiensis must have been one of the earliest out of Africa hominid migrations, reaching the island approximately 1 million years ago. Since the island of Flores is neighboring a deep strait in the seabed and remained isolated during the last glacial period, the ancestors of Homo floresiensis could have only reached the island by transport over water. Even though the sea levels were low during this time, it was only able for them to reach the island by, for instance, bamboo rafts or something like that about 1 million years ago. It was just too deep still to they couldn't walk. In 2016, a partial jaw and some fossilized teeth were found from this assumed ancestor of Floresiensis at Mata Menge on the island of Flores, approximately 74 kilometers away from Liangbua Cave. This jaw fragment and these teeth date to approximately 700,000 years ago and are even smaller than the Floresiensis fossils. Phylogenetic analysis published in 2017 suggests that Homo floresiensis was a descendant from the same ancestor of Homo habilis, which does point to a really very early out of Africa migration. This in itself could refute the hypothesis that Homo erectus could have been the ancestor, as it is thought that the bone structure of erectus and floresiensis are too different to have belonged to the same ancestor, even though they do share some dental similarities. Of course, as we all know, watching my videos and me doing this research, evidence pointing to a certain direction doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% factual evidence. It's possible that Floresiensis shared the same ancestor of Homo habilis, or a shared ancestor of Homo habilis and Homo erectus. We do know that more analysis and research needs to be done, which the researchers are very aware of. But there is a little bit of a conundrum, because constructing DNA samples from these bones is incredibly difficult. The main reason for that is that these bones haven't actually really fossilized like we've seen in other specimens. And when they tried to extract DNA from the teeth, the dentin had not enough concentration of DNA to successfully extract any. It's now proposed researchers try again to extract DNA from the teeth, but this time from the cementum, as it should have a higher concentration of DNA. However, at the time of me making this video in January of 2025, it's unknown if the researchers have been successful in their attempt at extracting Floresiensis DNA. So for more conclusive information about the ancestry of Homo floresiensis, we need to be patient and hopeful that they will be able to extract DNA from the specimens that they have uncovered so far in the nearby future. The body of Homo floresiensis LB1 seems to be a bit smaller than, for instance, Lucy from the Australopithecines, who lived approximately 3 million years ago. And Homo floresiensis might be the smallest member of the archaic human group that evolved from the Australopithecines. Homo floresiensis is also slightly smaller than Homo naledi, or Homo naledi, however you want to pronounce it. Although at the time of the discovery of Floresiensis, no one in the world knew of the existence of Homo naledi yet, because Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis are approximately the same size. I personally feel like it's plausible that naledi and Floresiensis share a same common ancestor, which could have resulted in their small size. So like I said earlier, the tallest Floresiensis skeleton that they have found so far stood at 1.1 meters. Which is 3 feet and 7 inches, and they would have weighed approximately 30 kilograms, which equates to 66 pounds on average. So it is believed that their small size is an effect of the natural process of insular dwarfism, which is the process and condition of large animals evolving or reducing their body size when their living area is limited to a small environment. This happens primarily on islands. And lo and behold, Homo floresiensis was discovered on the island of Flores, so this hypothesis therefore checks out. So let's take a quick look into the morphology of Homo floresiensis. What are some of the key features of what they look like? They had hunched shoulders and a wide pelvis, giving them a very different body shape than us modern humans. Their cranial shape was long and low, resembling the shape of Homo erectus more than Homo sapiens. They had a receding and small forehead with a flat face and a narrow nose. They had relatively large jaws and teeth, but they lacked the bony point on the chin. Their feet were quite long, and when compared to their overall size, they had a short big toe and the arch was quite flat. Their leg bones were wide compared to their overall length, and they had relatively long arms. The shoulder shape made it seem like they hunched because the shoulder was pointed forward. Of course, there are more differences, but like I said, I would touch up on a few key features in their morphology. It's at least nice to know that big Hobbit feet did not only exist in The Lord of the Rings, but also in real life with Homo Floresiensis. I do think that it's safe to say that these real-life Hobbit feet were also hairy, just like those in the stories of Tolkien. So again, Tolkien was right. The brain of Homo Floresiensis was much smaller than the brains of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and us modern humans. But we do know that with their small brains, they were at least intelligent enough to create tools and to control fire. But there is no evidence of deliberate burials. So how much smaller was their brain? The brain of Homo Floresiensis individual known as LB1 was estimated to have a volume of 380 cubic centimeters, which is remarkably small when compared to the brain of a Homo sapiens at approximately 1274 cubic centimeters. Compared that to the size of Homo neanderthalensis brain sizes at approximately 1410 cubic centimeters, we can clearly see how absolutely tiny the brain of Homo floresiensis was. So when did Homo floresiensis live on the island of Flores in Indonesia? Well, the oldest date that we have come from tools that were discovered that belonged to them. These tools have been dated to approximately 190,000 years ago. So their tools were made from stone, and they were mainly flakes, points, blades, and some microblades that could have been used as barbs. Some of these stone tools were discovered among the skeletal remains of LB1. But most of the stone tools that belong to Homo floresiensis were actually discovered at a very different location, near the remains of an extinct pygmy elephant, Stegodon. This suggests that the Homo floresiensis people hunted the small elephants, which is also evident from the cut marks on some of the Stegodon bones, which suggests that some of the stone tools were used to process meat. Other tools were found to have been used for working wood, fibrous materials, like for instance spear shaft making or trap making, and many of the Stegodon bones were charred, which indicates that Floresiensis was able to control fire for cooking, which Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens were all able to do as well around the same time. So with their small brain size, they were at least equally as capable. It seems that somewhere between 60,000 and 50,000 years ago, Homo floresiensis disappeared, which is actually around the same time the Stegodon disappeared as well. And fun fact, it was around this time that Homo sapiens, us modern humans, arrived in the area. So the youngest known bone of a Homo floresiensis individual dates from approximately 60,000 years ago, and the youngest stone tools attributed to them date from 50,000 years ago. Researchers have found bones from modern humans dating to approximately 46,000 years ago in the same cave, which indicates that the arrival of modern humans on the island and in the environment seems to have replaced the Floresiensis inhabitants. Many archaeologists and anthropologists believe that it was due to the arrival of Homo sapiens in the region that Homo floresiensis disappeared, that it was us, modern humans, who had a hand in the demise of the little hobbitses. But like I said at the start of this video, there are people who firmly believe that Homo floresiensis never went extinct, that they still roam in the secluded forests to this day. This has to do with the mythology of the island of Flores. So I'll tell you about the local legend, and after that we're going to take a look into a now retired anthropologist who has taken a serious look into the possibility that Homo floresiensis could possibly still be living on this island, and that they were the creatures that the local legend spoke about. So the local legend goes as follows. In the Naga language of Central Flores, there's a creature known as the Ebu Gogo. Ebu means grandparent, and Gogo means one who eats everything. So an English equivalent of the translation of the name would be something like old glutton. So this Ebu Gogo creature is described to be no more than 1.5 meters tall, which equates to roughly 5 feet. They are thought to be able walkers and fast runners. The legend describes them as having wide and flat noses with broad faces, sporting large mouths, and that their bodies were hairy. It's believed that they speak their own language, but that they are able to repeat the local language in a parrot-like fashion. For a long time, the legend of Ebu Gogo was attributed to monkeys living on the island of Flores. Some of the lore talks about the Ebu Gogo kidnapping human children to cook and eat them. But in these tales, the children always outsmarted the Ebu Gogo and got away. Another tale took place in the 18th century. It is said that villagers had given the Ebu Gogo a gift of palm fiber to make clothes. The Ebu Gogo took this palm fiber into their cave, and the villagers then set the cave ablaze by throwing in a lit torch, which would have killed all the occupants in the cave. Although the tale does mention the possibility that one couple might have fled into the forest while the cave was burning everyone and everything inside. Okay, so now that you all know about the myths of these tiny, hairy, human-like creatures on the island of Flores, it's time to look into why this retired anthropologists think that it's possible that Homo Floresiensis may still be alive, or at least be the species that the mythical creatures of the Ebu Gogo were based upon. Some people are of the belief that the ape-man myth, the Ebu Gogo myth, originated after the announcement of Homo Floresiensis, although now retired anthropologist Gregory IV refutes this, because the first time he recorded physical descriptions of the ape-man was back in July of 2003, which was more than 2 months before the remains of the first Homo Floresiensis individual were even discovered by the paleoanthropologists, which occurred back in September of 2003. And then it took more than a year before the species of Homo Floresiensis was even announced to the public, and even after that, not many Flores inhabitants at the time learned much about the discovery, besides that some remains were found. So who even told Mr. Forth about these ape-like men? This was something I wondered about, so I looked into it, and I found this article on sapiens.org that is actually written by Gregory Forth himself. Now, I don't usually accept the written words of the person and their claims I'm researching as my go-to source, but for this instance, I think it's good to listen to what the man has to say. So let's take a look into the people who told Mr. Forth about these ape-like men and why he thinks that they may speak truthful. So on the island of Flores, there's a couple of different ethnic populations, and one of these are the Leo people. The Leo people have their own language, and in their language they speak of a creature named Laihoa, which translates to ape-man. If this is the same ape-man as the Ebu Gogo myth, we don't know. They describe these ape-men as small, upright walking, and hairy, and they've been speaking about these ape-men for a very, very long time. Eyewitness accounts go back to at least since the 1960s, but possibly much longer. The Leo people live between 300 and 400 kilometers, which equates roughly to between 186 and 248 miles, away from the Liangbua cave where the remains of Homo Floresiensis was discovered. The Leo people live in one of the island's most mountainous regions. While most of them have abandoned the highland villages in the last 100 years to cultivate a variety of plants in the permanent irrigated fields located in the lower lying places, some of them still plant and live in higher elevations in modern times, often quite a considerable distance away from roads and other humans. The highest mountains in the area of where they live remain covered in jungle. And it is mainly in these locations that the Leo people encounter these small ape-like men. So Mr. Forth is not saying that without a doubt the Leo ape men exist as flesh and blood creatures, but proving that they are imaginary ape-like creatures at the same time is also no easy task. So Mr. Forth has been conducting fieldwork on the island of Flores since 1984 and has returned 19 times to the island since. He spends around 2 to 3 months in the field whenever he visits the island. Most of the claims of the Leo people about having encountered these ape-like men are not taken as seriously by him, because most of them may have ulterior motives, especially those who deal in magically powerful ape-man body parts or substances, just to give an example. They're spiritual leaders and all that stuff. He doesn't take them as serious. But there are some claims of encounters that he does consider to be valuable. Usually when 2 or more people claim to have seen the same thing at the same time, and he has recorded several of such accounts. Of course, he is aware of the fact that the witnesses in these cases may have been mistaken or misremembered what they saw. The Leo people themselves are really not familiar with human evolution. In their textbooks, there were no illustrations of non-Homo sapiens human ancestors. So there's no reason to assume that their view of the Flores ape-like men has been shaped by the discovery of Homo Floresiensis, especially since their eyewitness accounts go back as far as the 1960s, at least, which was decades before the remains of Homo Floresiensis were first discovered. For the Leo people, the ape men are a part of their local environment. They consider them as extremely rare, but to them they are as real as, for instance, the Komodo dragon, who also live in their environment. The Leo people also never go out to look for the ape men. They seem to have no motive, not financial, not social, or otherwise, to find an ape man specimen. At the same time, they are also barely aware of the outside scientific views, or any views that claim that such creatures don't exist. So there seems to be no ideological interest to prove any scientific establishment wrong. So according to Forth, skeptics should wonder why the Leo people on the island of Flores think that the ape men exist, and to give these people at least a fair hearing. Because if it is accepted as plausible accounts of real creatures, it would mean that what the Leo people say presents a challenge to biology and paleoanthropology. And if it's not plausible, then another challenge arises, according to Forth, to explain why people subscribe to the empirical existence of entities with little or no basis in observable reality. So therefore he has written the book Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominoid, back in 2022. And ever since he wrote that book, numerous articles have popped up online speaking of the possibility that Homo Floresiensis never went extinct, and that they still roam the Flores jungles in modern times. And that is exactly why there are people who are of the belief that Homo Floresiensis never went extinct. So as you can imagine, there is a lot more that we can say about Homo Floresiensis, and hopefully a lot more new information will be brought to the public as time goes on. Controversies to unravel, and maybe one day DNA analysis can be carried out. I'm personally of the belief that Homo Floresiensis will always be one of the most enigmatic species in the Homo genus, because they are just so curiously different compared to most other species in our genus. So my question to you is, what do you think of the possibility that Homo Floresiensis might still be roaming around the jungles of Flores Island? And what do you think of this species itself? Let me know in the comments down below. Like I said earlier, I'm going to return to Turkey in September of this year. We've added Mount Nemrut to the itinerary, and I'll leave the link to the tour in the description down below. I'll give you more information on the tour in upcoming videos. And also be sure to check out the merch store at historywithkaylee.com. And with that said, if you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, or click one of the links in the description down below, or click a video in the end card. I would also like to say a massive thank you to my patrons and my channel members. Thank you so much. And if you want to support me for a one-time only deal, go to historywithkaylee.live. Also, this is my nickname. My nickname is Klee, and I now have a neon sign as a backlight, which looks awesome, and I'm very proud of that. And it'll be in all my videos from now on. With that said, I will see you in the next video. Bye!